A boy stumbles on the uneven stone. His father's hand catches his shoulder before he falls. No words are spoken. The hand steadies, then releases. The boy continues walking, more carefully now. What was childhood actually like in the time of Jesus more than 2,000 years ago? When did a child stop being a child? What did a 5-year-old do all day? What did a 10-year-old already know how to build, carry, or recite from memory? And why did some children survive to adulthood while others did not? Childhood in first-century Galilee was not protected, prolonged, or romanticized. It was short, functional, and shaped entirely by necessity. A child learned by watching, by failing, by carrying real weight. There were no explanations before experience, no safety margins, no second chances for carelessness. By the time a boy was 12, he was expected to work like a man. By the time a girl was 13, she was often already preparing for marriage. Understanding how children were raised in this world changes the way we read the Gospels and reveals why Jesus used the language of childhood so deliberately. Birth was not celebrated with certainty, it was survived. Most families expected to lose at least one child before the age of 5. Disease moved fast. Fevers came without warning. Dehydration from illness could kill within days. There were no hospitals, no medicines beyond herbs and prayers. A mother who gave birth did so with older women attending, in a room thick with heat and fear. If the child drew breath and continued breathing, relief came in stages. First breath, first day, first week, first month. Every milestone was noted, not with gifts, but with quiet gratitude. The child was wrapped tightly in strips of cloth, arms pinned to the sides. This was not cruelty. It was believed to help the limbs grow straight, to keep the infant calm, to protect against injury. The baby was placed in a feeding trough, lined with straw, the same kind used for animals. There was no cradle, no separate furniture. The manger was practical, stable, and always nearby. For the first 2 years, the child stayed close to the mother. Nursing continued longer than in the modern world, sometimes until the child was 3. This was survival, not sentiment. Breast milk was the safest food. Water could carry sickness. Goat's milk spoiled quickly. The breast provided immunity, nutrition, and a bond that kept the child alive. Weaning was a significant event. Some families marked it with a small meal, a gathering. It meant the child had survived the most vulnerable stage, but it also meant the child was now expected to begin learning. Learning began by watching. A child of 3 or 4 sat near the mother while she ground grain. The child saw the rhythm, the circular motion, the pressure required. Later, the child would try. The stone would barely move. The mother would adjust the child's hands without speaking, then return to her own work. Days later, the child would try again. Slowly, the body learned. This was education. No lessons, no explanations, only observation, imitation, and repetition. A boy watched his father measure wood, mark it with charcoal, cut it with a saw. He saw mistakes corrected. He saw tools cared for, sharpened, stored. He was handed the smallest tasks. First, hold this, carry that, fetch the other. If he dropped something, he was corrected with a look or a word. If he succeeded, nothing was said. Success was expected, not praised. A girl watched her mother light the fire, manage the coals, balance the heat. She learned which herbs could be eaten and which caused sickness. She learned to recognize when dough had risen enough, when oil was too hot, when bread was burning. She learned by being present, by small tasks that grew slowly larger. Mistakes had consequences. A spilled jar of oil meant less food. A fire built poorly meant cold nights. Childhood was not rehearsal, it was participation. And participation carried real weight. By the age of 6 or 7, A boy was already working, not playing at work, actually working. He carried water from the well in a jar smaller than his mother's, but still heavy enough to make his arms shake. He led the family goat to pasture, watching it for hours while it grazed. If the goat wandered too far, he had to retrieve it. If it was stolen or lost, the family lost milk, cheese, and future offspring. The responsibility was his. He learned that inattention had costs. A girl of the same age was grinding grain, hauling water, watching younger siblings, and learning to bake. Her hands were already calloused. Her back already understood the weight of labor. She was not considered young. She was considered useful. Education outside the home began at the synagogue, but only for boys. Around the age of 5 or 6, boys were brought to hear the Torah read aloud. They sat on the floor, legs crossed, and listened. The words were in Hebrew, a language most families no longer spoke daily. But the boys were expected to memorize. Repetition was the method. The teacher, usually an older man or a scribe, would recite a verse. The boys would repeat it again and again, 50 times, 100, until the words lived in the throat, without thought. There were no scrolls for students, no written notes. Everything was carried in memory. A boy who could recite large portions of the Torah by age 10 was considered intelligent and disciplined. A boy who could not was considered slow or rebellious. The pressure was constant. Mistakes were corrected sharply. Success brought no reward, only the expectation of more. But not all learning happened in the synagogue. The street was a classroom. The courtyard was a test. A boy learned to read the sky for weather, to recognize the sound of Roman soldiers approaching, to know which neighbors could be trusted and which could not. He learned the weight of a denarius, the cost of bread, the danger of debt. A girl learned the same, though her world was smaller. She knew every house on her street, every family's reputation. She understood hierarchy without being taught. She knew who ate well and who did not. She learned to be silent around men. She did not know. She learned that safety came from obedience and reputation. Discipline was immediate and physical. A child who spoke disrespectfully was struck. A child who stole was beaten publicly. A child who dishonored the family name brought shame that lasted for years. There was no time out, no conversation about feelings. The rod was not considered cruel, it was considered necessary. The community supported this. A neighbor who saw a child misbehaving had the right to correct that child. Parents were expected to enforce respect, obedience, and fear of consequences. Love was present, but it was not soft. It was the love that prepared a child to survive a hard world. Not all children were the same. Wealth created distance even in childhood. A boy from a family with land, animals, and stored grain had more time to study. His father could afford to send him to a respected teacher. He wore cleaner clothes. His hands were less scarred. A poor boy worked longer, learned faster, and carried more responsibility younger. By age 10, he was already calculating how to help the family avoid hunger. A wealthy girl learned to manage servants. A poor girl became one. The divide was visible in posture, in speech, in the confidence or hesitancy of a child's movements. Childhood did not erase social structure, it reinforced it. Then came the threshold. For boys, around 12 or 13, there was a shift. He was no longer called a child. He was called to adult responsibility. In religious terms, he became a son of the commandment, bar mitzvah. He was expected to fast on holy days, to fulfill all religious obligations, to work a full day, to be consulted, in some measure, on family decisions. The transition was not marked by a large ceremony. In most families, it was marked by silence. One day, the father handed the son a task previously reserved for adults, and the son was expected to complete it. No excuses, no second tries. For girls, the transition came even earlier. By 12 or 13, many were already betrothed. Marriage negotiations had begun. When they were 10 or 11, their childhood ended not with responsibility, but with transfer from the authority of the father to the authority of a husband. Some girls were afraid, others were relieved to have their futures settled. None were asked if they were ready. Readiness was assumed. It was in this world that Jesus grew up. He carried water as a boy. He memorized Torah in the synagogue. He watched his father work and learned to work beside him. He knew hunger. He knew cold. He knew the sting of correction and the weight of expectation. He was not given a protected, extended childhood. He was given the same short, demanding, functional upbringing as every other child in Nazareth. And when he later spoke about children, about receiving the kingdom like a child, about letting the little ones come to him, those who heard him understood something modern readers often miss. He was not romanticizing innocence. He was honoring dependence, trust, the posture of a child who knows they cannot survive alone, who reaches up without pride, who follows without negotiating. Childhood, in the time of Jesus, was not a season of discovery. It was a season of formation, and formation was harsh, deliberate, and necessary. The world did not wait for children to be ready. It required them to become ready, fast, and those who survived carried that readiness in their bodies for the rest of their lives.